Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll begin the meeting. On va commencer la réunion pour le 6 juin 2017, le Comité des finances et de développement économique, the Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting for June 6, 2017. Councillor Taylor is away on city business in the city. Declaration of interest, déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux le 2 mai 2017, May 2nd, 2017 minutes. Carried. Communications as presented. 2016 report on French language services, rapport sur les services en français. We have a presentation on that, so we'll come back. Status update, Finance and Economic Development Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending May 19th. Rapport de situation. Received. Appointment to the Downtown Rideau Business Improvement Area. Nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de Centre-Ville Rideau. Appointments of Randy Trogler and Patricia Aramuni to the Downtown Rideau Business Area Improvement. Carried. Appointment to the Bank Street BIA. Nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de la rue Bank. Les noms, seulement une personne, Vinod Shadhari. Carried. Corporate Services Department, Direction générale des services, rapport sur les fonds d'investissement et de dotation de 2016, 2016 Investment and Endowment Fund Report.
Is there a presentation?
No. It's just adding one full-time. It's receiving the results and... Okay, go ahead now. You want to put your mic on?
Sorry. It actually is on. I just need to eat it. I'm just wondering in the recommendations if the $200 million, if there needs to be a recommendation to include that, because I don't see it in the report.
Similar?
The $200 million from the endowment fund?
Yes.
You already have adopted in the last long-range financial plan that you would continue to maintain that fund, and we would put the returns from it into the capital fund.
Right. So when we adopt a new LRFP, don't we have to, doesn't there have to be a compatible recommendation on that $200 million?
Not at this point in time. It's not in this report anyway. That would be in the long-range financial plan, not in this report on your investment returns. But no, if we don't have a new recommendation, I would say the recommendation that had been previously adopted is still in place. I don't think it needs to be, but if you want to move a motion to reinforce that, we please.
So that would be when we get to the LRFP.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I would suggest that Marion's first comment, unless you want to change it, it remains council policy. Financing, on the report, received and adopted. Carried. Financing lease arrangements, 2016 Convention de Crédit Bail 2016. Received. Capital adjustment and closing projects, city tax and rate support, ajustement de budget et cessation des projets soutien par les impôts foncières. Carried. Direction générale de la planification, planning, infrastructure and economic development. Item number 8, comprehensive asset management update.
We hold that for questions.
Corporate Services Department, long-range financial plan. There'll be a presentation. Item 10, proposed 28 budget timeline and consultation process proposé pour le budget 2018 et les consultations publiques. Yep. 11, Information Technology Services Resource Alignment. Sorry? Hold. Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department report of the Education and Economy Summit. Councillor Brockington will give us an update. We'll hold it. 2016 Economic Development Strategy Implementation and 2017 Implementation Plan. Okay. Hold. Yeah. Brownfields Grant Program Application 852 Bank Street. Carried. All right, information previously distributed, information distribuée auparavant, contract for 1127 Mill Street, contrat pour 1127 Rue Mill, Dickinson House and the Carriage Shed is just received. Okay, so we have one person who wishes to speak to an item, so we'll go to that item first, which is item, if anyone else would like to speak to any item on the agenda, if you could just go to the city clerk's section by the television and sign up. To date, we have one person who is going to speak to item number 13, Economic Development Strategy and Implementation. So we'll ask Mr. Vincent and Nick Ives Allison like to come and speak to this item. This is the report on the Economic Development Strategy. And I believe, Councillor Leeper, had you asked that this item be held? So the floor is yours. You just press the button and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for having us here. This is Nick Ives Allison, who's the new General Manager of the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. I'm Andrew Vincent, outgoing Executive Director of the Music Industry Coalition, but working on the music strategy. And we just wanted to say a few very short comments in support of the first of all, the priority that's being placed on creative industries. We think this is very exciting in terms of where the city is going and certainly how music fits into that, and we're excited about music's role in how that rolls out. Specifically, it's great to see that the music industry, music strategy that's in the initial stages of being developed is being included in this thinking. The idea of a creative hub, I think, is one that has a lot of potential, and we're excited to see what that means for OMIC going forward. And generally just we're looking forward to discussions with economic development and cultural services about the next steps for these ideas. So that's about all. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the great work that you've done bringing us up to this stage, and appreciate your positive comments. I believe Councillor Leeper had a question.
Thanks, Chair. And I will just follow up with Mr. Smith with respect to this creative industries hub that has been proposed. Looks like a fantastic opportunity. I know in the province, the creative industries that include film and TV, publishing, music, digital media, broadcasting, a number of those fall under the umbrella of the Ontario Media Development Corporation, which is a good policy lens on how the province treats these various sectors. Just wondering if I could hear from Mr. Smith. Exciting opportunity, but can we get some more color with respect to whether what is being thought about is a physical hub that would be funded by the city, whether it's an umbrella working group, just maybe a bit more color than is in the report on what this hub might look like.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So this is very much a concept at this point, and I think there's no question about it as far as an overall organizational structure where we're bringing these various organizations under a single umbrella dealing with the creative industry sector, which includes the arts, film, music, as Mr. Vincent has indicated. And I think the other thing that we're really looking at is whether we can find an opportunity to actually also introduce a physical presence for a creative industries hub. So, as you know, we have the Innovation Hub at the Bayview Yards, which is focused on the high-tech sector. We just established the sports hall, or the sports hub at the RA Centre. We've got Ottawa Tourism, which is a hub that focuses on the tourism sector and the attraction of major events. And I think there's a real opportunity to look at bringing a shared organizational type of a structure to the fore that actually incorporates the various creative industries. So opportunities for shared services. Again, this would be a great opportunity to house the Ottawa Film Office, where they have some additional support. So that's very much on the agenda to look at doing that. We don't have a place identified, but that's part of what we want to do as we explore those opportunities through 2017.
If I can follow up, One of the advantages of working with a partner organization like the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition is that they bring a lot of expertise to the table. It keeps our overhead very low to be able to count on them to provide some of the services that we can contract to them. We have currently contracted out the development of a music strategy to them. I just want some color around the role of these third-party organizations like Film and TV Office, which is now much more independent, the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. Is it the intention that we would continue to use a media industries hub to encourage and help those organizations grow, or are we looking at bringing more of that in-house or that expertise in-house?
I think the whole strategy, Mr. Mayor, is really looking at capitalizing on opportunities to work with our partners. Our partners have the expertise to really get into the meat of what we need to do to advance some of these initiatives related to the different economic development sectors that we're involved with. And I think looking at staff, we're really there to steer the ship, if you like, but we're looking at capitalizing on the expertise that these groups can bring to the table. And really what we're looking to do is to make sure that the various groups are talking to each other and moving towards achieving common objectives.
Fantastic. That's the comfort I was looking for, Mr. Mayor, and I think it is it's important to recognize the film and TV industry and the music industry are, each other's best customers probably, so I'm looking forward to seeing how those opportunities arise. I think it will be important to make sure we're talking with the industry coalition as they work with us to develop a music strategy to have that potential future hub in mind while they're developing the strategy. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just very briefly to thank our colleague, Councillor Leeper. As you know, we've asked him to take on the liaison on the music sector, which has great potential for our city, and I think we saw a lot of that during the Juno Awards, and we were able to, at the Innovation Centre, announce the $30,000 contribution from economic development to help kickstart that process. So we've seen other cities around the world that have developed a music industry, and I wish our staff and our partners the very best as we collaborate together, and thank Councillor Leeper for acting as our liaison and going to lots of meetings and representing us very well with the sector. So thank you, and thank you very much to our partners. Merci beaucoup. So on the report as presented, received and carried. In respect to our colleague, Councillor Brockington, who's here, I'm going to go to item number 12, since we don't have any other members of the public, to come and speak on the report on the Education Economy Summit, rapport sur le sommet sur l'éducation et l'économie. As many of you know, and some of you actually were good enough to attend parts of the summit, we had a really great turnout of, I think, over 200 people from the education sector and from economic development, with a goal of determining how we could better work together. And I was very pleased when we were able to invite the Governor-General, who has such great knowledge on this subject, both in his capacity as Governor-General, but more so the work that he did as President of the University of Waterloo and as Principal of McGill University. And you can well imagine it was a pretty big catch for us to get as our keynote speaker the Governor-General, but we had some great speakers from school boards, from technology sectors, and we'd asked our colleague, Councillor Brockington, to take leadership role on this, and he did a great job. And one of the asks that I put before him was to come back to committee to give us a synopsis of recommendations and how we're progressing. So thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, for taking on that role. I found it to be a very invigorating session, lots of young people there to participate as well, and we'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Watson, and good morning to members of the committee. First, thank you to Mayor Watson for your vision. I know in the 2014 election you identified this as a priority for the city to host an education and local economy summit, and in your State of the City address in 2016 you laid the framework for this summit, so thank you very much for this opportunity. I do want to acknowledge members of the city's economic development team who were paramount in making this summit a success as well. Certainly Mr. Smith and his team, specifically Matt Eason and Angela Scanlon, who I worked with very closely on the summit as it progressed, as well as Kelly Shields, Sherry Bettel, Sad Bashir, who's the former manager as well. From the Mayor's office, Matt Gravel, and in my office, Carol Eagle. I wanted to identify them. The City of Ottawa hosted an Education and the Economy Summit in October of 2016. The purpose of the summit was to provide a forum for stakeholders from across Ottawa to discuss topics such as the ability to better work together, to generate more work-integrated learning opportunities for students, how to provide better access to talent for employers, and ultimately how to support long-term prosperity for Ottawa. More specifically, the event was meant to explore how business and public and private organizations can take a more active part in the education process. It was also intended to highlight how this type of integrated approach can help to meet the evolving needs of the workforce and make Ottawa an attractive place to get an education and pursue a career. So before the summit was held, I went to visit about a dozen local stakeholders, all school boards, all the colleges and universities, nonprofit organizations in education, not only to talk about the summit and sort of the intentions of the summit, but to have an understanding what their key issues were, how they were involved locally, but how they thought the city could play a better role as a liaison between the education sector and the local economy. So that helped build the themes of the summit and the types of workshops that were offered. And coming out of the summit, we just didn't want to have a summit. We wanted for there to be momentum, and we wanted to have a plan in place that we could carry forward after the summit. And so in the report, it talks about the establishment of a talent committee. It talks about work-integrated learning pledge. It discussed enhanced summer student employment programs, the Work in Ottawa Initiative, local employment planning councils. So I'm not going to go into detail just because they're in the report. But certainly the summit was a success. We had over 200 participants, and I think people understood the value that there is for the city to play going forward, and that Ottawa really is an education hub. We have significant university talent. There is a desire to retain graduates when they graduate from post-secondary institutions and have them to be contributing members of the City of Ottawa. And so, again, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the opportunity to be engaged, and if there are detailed questions about the report, Mr. Smith is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to Councillor Bonkton or Mr. Smith? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We appreciate that, and we look forward to the continuation of the follow-up on the recommendations. So on the report received, alors maintenant, le prochain, c'est numéro 1, rapport sur les services en français 2016. Je pense que Michel Rochette est ici pour une présentation. Bonjour Michel, et aussi merci beaucoup à la personne sur le conseil qui est responsable pour le comité consultatif, c'est Eli Shantiri. Et je pense que Michel avait une présentation, et après ça, des questions, commentaires. Bienvenue.
Bonjour Monsieur le maire et les membres du conseil. Good morning Mr. Mayor and members of council. Merci de me donner l'occasion ce matin de vous présenter le rapport sur les services en français 2016. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to present the 2016 report on French language services. Prochaine slide. Au début du rapport sur les services en français 2016, on retrouve quelques exemples qui démontrent que les directions générales ont été proactives et ont intégré les principes de la politique de bilinguisme dans leur modèle de prestation de services auprès de nos résidents et de nos employés. On y mentionne plus spécifiquement la Direction générale des loisirs, de la culture et des installations, la Direction générale des services sociaux et communautaires, ainsi que la Direction générale de l'innovation et du rendement. Il y a plusieurs beaux exemples de leurs initiatives en 2016 et sur ce, je les félicite. Il est à noter aussi que les plaintes reçues par les services en français ont diminué pour la deuxième année consécutive. Nous avons passé de 83 plaintes en 2015 à 23 plaintes en 2016. Ceci représente une baisse d'environ 72%. De plus, les services des ressources humaines partagent que 16% des postes de la ville étaient désignés bilingues à la fin de 2016, ce qui est identique au pourcentage de 2015. Sur la diapositive sur l'écran, je vous présente l'historique concernant les plaintes sur les services en français depuis 2012. Comme vous pouvez le constater, le nombre de plaintes fluctue d'année en année. Cependant, pour 2 années consécutives, la Ville a constaté une baisse. Je crois qu'il est important de noter que 3 directions générales ont vu une baisse dans leurs plaintes respectives en 2016. La Direction générale des transports ont passé de 10 à 3 plaintes. La Direction générale de l'innovation et du rendement ont passé de 5 à 3 plaintes. Et la Direction générale des loisirs, de la culture et des installations ont passé de 6 à 9 plaintes. Je tiens à remercier toutes les directions générales pour leur engagement à fournir des services dans les 2 langues à nos résidents et nos employés. For the next slide regarding operational plans, as a result of the successful implementation of 7 core standards in 2015 as part of the department operational plans, Council approved 4 new standards as part of the 2015 report on French language services in November of last year. Progress reports were submitted by all departments indicating that they were progressing well in implementing and achieving the 4 new standards. The objective is to attain 100% compliance on all 4 standards by all departments at the end of 2017. We will be reporting back on this item in 2018 as part of the 2017 report on French language services. Pour conclure, en 2017, les services en français continueront de prêter main forte aux directions générales de la Ville pour leur communication, leurs programmes et leurs services aux résidents, visiteurs et employés. Pour y parvenir, nous, la Direction des services en français, allons collaborer avec elles dans l'élaboration de leurs plans opérationnels. Nous leur donnerons des conseils et des outils pour les épauler. Nous les informerons des pratiques exemplaires en matière de prestations de services en français pouvant être intégrées au modèle de prestation actuel et nous leur fournirons des services de traduction de qualité à l'échelle de la Ville. Sur ce, je vous remercie. Thank you very much.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Michel. Conseiller Chantiri, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merci beaucoup, Michel. Thank you for your presentation and also thank you for your leadership with the French Language Advisory Committee. I do have a question, Michel, if I may. J'aimerais poser une question. Pouvez-vous nous parler de vos travaux pour promouvoir l'offre de services en français à longue tournée?
Merci, Monsieur le maire. Merci beaucoup de me donner l'occasion de vous mettre en valeur les initiatives de la Direction des services en français avec les directions générales. C'est une collaboration pour cette promotion-là à l'interne avec pour les employés. La Direction des services en français travaille en étroite collaboration avec les directions générales en fournissant de l'aide dans l'élaboration d'approches communes dans la prestation de leurs services dans les 2 langues. La DSF crée des outils à l'interne pour pouvoir épauler les directions générales dans le développement et dans la mise en œuvre de leurs plans opérationnels. Afin d'alimenter le sentiment d'appartenance des employés francophones et francophiles, la Direction des services en français publie un bulletin interne qui s'appelle Francoforum, à plus de 700 abonnés, qui fait la une des activités dans la communauté, aussi la promotion de livres intéressants à lire. Donc, c'est très, très, très bien reçu. Aussi, via la communication aux employés, nous publions mensuellement ce qui s'appelle un faux pas, qui est un petit peu un jeu questionnaire qui permet aux employés de pratiquer leur grammaire en français. C'est publié dans les 2 langues pour but d'apprentissage et pour aussi les engager. De plus, le service en français est présent avec l'organisation du 10e rendez-vous francophone du maire, plus spécifiquement en 2016. Nous travaillons très étroitement avec le bureau du maire, ainsi que la planification de la journée du 25 septembre, le jour des Franco-Ontariens et des Franco-Ontariennes. Donc, nous travaillons pour ces événements-là aussi. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, would I be able to make my comment now? Okay. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Michel. J'aimerais mettre en évidence l'excellent travail de l'équipe de services en français. Je suis membre du comité consultatif sur le service en français et j'ai vu depuis l'engagement de citer et cap et je la facilité. Le rapport indiquait cette année encore qu'elle s'est bien degree et qu'elle travaille fort. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for all your effort on here and on the committee as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Merci beaucoup, conseiller. Conseiller Tchernoshenko, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, M. le maire. Merci pour ce rapport. J'ai une question à propos du peut-être niveau du contentement, si on peut dire ça. Le fait qu'on a moins de plaintes, c'est une sorte d'indicateur ou indicatrice négatif. Le fait qu'il y a une baisse dans le nombre de plaintes, c'est super. Mais ce que j'aimerais savoir, c'est est-ce qu'on a une idée de à quel point les gens sont contents du niveau du français qui offre des services qui sont offerts par la ville. On sait qu'il y a moins de gens qui sont très mal contents ou mécontents au point qui se plaignent. Mais est-ce qu'on a des sondages ou une façon de mesurer ça?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le maire. La réponse simple, c'est non, il n'y a pas un sondage qui comptabilise nécessairement le contentement. Cependant, ce que je peux, si vous me permettez de partager, c'est que ce qu'on voit de plus en plus, puis une des raisons qui contribue à la baisse des plaintes, c'est que les directions générales ont régulièrement consulté les services en français sur des pratiques exemplaires en matière de prestations de services bilingues. Donc, elles sont engagées, ils mettent vraiment la politique de bilinguisme à l'avant-plan de leur planification. Donc, on sait que c'est vraiment à l'avant de la pensée. On peut aussi attribuer cette baisse-là aux retombées positives par rapport aux plans opérationnels et la mise en œuvre de ces standards-là auxquels les directions générales travaillent pendant l'année pour fin d'amélioration. Donc, c'est sûr qu'il y a toujours moyen qu'on continue à améliorer. On travaille toujours en collaboration avec les directions générales pour améliorer et tout le temps chercher à offrir un excellent service dans les deux langues.
Alors, on a les moyens pour recevoir des suggestions, des commentaires à part de ce mesure du nombre de plaintes, j'espère, parce qu'on sait très bien comme conseiller, il y a les gens qui nous appellent, qui envoient des courriels parce qu'ils sont très mécontents de certaines choses, mais on n'entend jamais, rarement, les gens nous contactent pour nous dire je suis légèrement pas content ou très content de ce que vous faites pour nous, et ce serait utile, je crois, d'avoir une façon d'avoir un peu ce sentiment de la public.
Les résidents peuvent toujours communiquer avec nous par courriel ou via le site web pour nous fournir leur rétroaction. Donc, la direction des services, nous avons un courriel aussi qui permet aux résidents de communiquer avec nous. Aussi, il y a beaucoup de rétroaction plutôt informelle qui se fait lors de notre engagement auprès de la communauté quand on se présente aux événements et tout ça. Donc, c'est certain qu'on reçoit aussi de la rétroaction positive, peut-être de façon plus informelle lorsqu'on est présent dans la communauté.
Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, conseiller. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, M. le maire. Félicitations sur le rapport. Ça va bonne direction. Quand j'ai regardé le rapport, on peut voir que ça diminue à la place d'augmenter. Ça, c'est des bonnes nouvelles pour la ville d'Ottawa et les résidents francophones de la communauté d'Ottawa. Quand on regarde pour la diminution des plaintes, y a-t-il une façon aussi de regarder les personnes qui ont mis des plaintes, si les plaintes ont été travaillées dessus d'une manière de satisfaction, que ça a résolu le problème qu'il y avait vu en place?
Monsieur le maire, donc, juste pour confirmer, vous voulez savoir de quelle façon les services en français répondent et résoudent les plaintes des résidents. Okay, merci beaucoup.
Non, vas-y.
Donc, nous pouvons recevoir les plaintes de plusieurs différents canaux. Donc, plus spécifiquement, la grande majorité des plaintes sont reçues via le site web où il y a le formulaire pour les plaintes. On peut les recevoir via 311, on peut les recevoir aussi via le courriel dont j'ai mentionné ou juste simplement par téléphone. Des fois, les gens m'appellent directement. Les plaintes sont enregistrées. Il y a un suivi où ce qu'on fait immédiatement, on engage la direction générale pour faire état de la situation, pour voir ce qui s'est passé. Donc, et suite à ce moment-là, la direction des services en français travaille collaborativement avec la direction générale pour, premièrement, rectifier le problème le plus rapidement possible et deux, de mettre en œuvre des mécanismes correctifs pour assurer que cette plainte-là ne se répète pas. Puis des fois, ces mécanismes-là sont d'écrire, on prépare, nous, ici, à la direction des services en français, des courriels ou des mémos pour la direction générale pour partager avec les employés des rappels, plus spécifiquement avec leurs obligations par rapport à la politique de bilinguisme. Donc, il y a vraiment un suivi qui est très, très ardu, je pourrais dire, pour assurer de minimiser la capacité que cette plainte-là se répète.
Ça, c'est une bonne nouvelle. Qu'est-ce que c'est comme suggestion dans le futur? Je ne sais pas si ce sera possible. Quand vous faites un rapport dans le futur, et vous indiquez comme exemple 23 plaintes à comparer, puis je ne me rappelle pas le montant l'année d'avant. Ça serait-il possible d'identifier que les plaintes ont été travaillées dessus et les résidents ont été satisfaits avec les résultats. Et les plaintes qu'on a reçues, qu'on n'a pas été capable de résoudre le problème, si ça pourrait être indiqué, c'est quelque chose qui pourrait être possible dans le futur?
Oui, Monsieur le maire, nous pourrions inclure ça dans le rapport futur. Juste à titre d'information, comme indiqué dans le rapport, toutes les plaintes ont été fermées. Donc, il y a pas une plainte. Donc, tous les plaintes sur les services en français à l'échelle de la ville viennent au bureau de la direction des services en français. Nous sommes engagés, ainsi que les directions générales, de fermer tous les plaintes par rapport à ça. Et ceci a été fait en 2016, mais je peux porter plus de précision dans le prochain rapport. Merci beaucoup.
Ça pourrait aider quand on travaille dans la communauté, puis pour identifier les plaintes qu'on a et comme nationalité travailler dessus. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions? Bien, certainement. Merci, Michel, et merci à toute ton équipe pour le bon travail. Grâce à vous et au reste du personnel dévoué, dans tous les départements de la Ville d'Ottawa, nous avons fait beaucoup de progrès depuis 2010. D'année en année, nous offrons de plus en plus de services et de programmes, et ce, d'une meilleure qualité à nos résidents francophones. Par exemple, le service des parcs et loisirs a fait des efforts importants pour fournir plus de programmes en français dans tous les quartiers de la Ville, et leurs efforts donnent des résultats. Par exemple, depuis 2010, le nombre de programmes offerts en français a augmenté de plus de 10% et les inscriptions de participants francophones ont augmenté de plus de 20%. Ce sont d'excellentes nouvelles pour les résidents et les familles francophones d'Ottawa pour qui l'accès à ces services en français joue un rôle essentiel dans leur vie et tous les jours. Je suis aussi fier du progrès que nous avons fait de renforcer nos institutions culturelles comme la Nouvelle Scène, où la Ville a investi plus de 2 millions de dollars pour donner la communauté de théâtre français un nouveau lieu dont elle avait besoin. Nous continuons à améliorer nos services et nos programmes et nous continuerons à investir dans la communauté francophone où bénéficient tous les résidents. Alors, merci pour tous vos efforts. Merci, conseiller Elias Chantiri et les membres des bénévoles qui siègent comme les membres de la comité consultatif sur la langue française. Et bravo, continue good work. On the report, recevoir. Merci. Alors, le prochain, c'est numéro 8, Comprehensive Asset Management Program. Who asked that that be held? Councillor Hubley? I'll ask Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
To come forward to answer any questions.
The question for staff is to do with page 4 of the report. down near the bottom, it talks about contributions to the tax-funded renewal envelopes have increased by $51 million a year, and the infrastructure gap identified in 2012 report being reduced by $20 million. But I can't find anywhere in there more details about the gap. And I didn't go back to 2012. So can you just enlighten us today for context for that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the actual financial details are more contained in the long-range financial plan. So if you're looking at the history in terms of what we spent and what's ahead, that's where it's detailed. What we're presenting here is basically a snapshot in terms of the annual reinvestment rates that we had targeted and how we've made progress towards reducing the annual deficit.
Right, but you reference an infrastructure gap. What is the gap?
Sure, I'll let Isabella respond.
So the gap that we've identified in tax long-range finance, so the gap specific to tax-supported capital is $195 million versus the $125 million which we're currently funding. So it's on average, $70 million per year. $70
million, but we've reduced that by $20 million a year.
So that is a reduction from in 2017, like in 2012, the gap, if we escalated that to 2017 dollars, it would have been about $20 million more than that, $90 million.
Okay.
So we've reduced it by 20.
And what are we projecting? Are we going to continue to reduce that gap?
That's part of the long-range financial plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's the clarification I wanted, Mr. Mayor.
What's that?
That's the clarification I wanted. I
Yeah.
thought we were doing a good job of reducing it, so.
Yeah, I know it's nice to see it going down that direction. Councillor Egelin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So on a related question, we all know money is an issue, but if you took money out of the equation, what's the single biggest challenge that you face in maintaining the roads at a standard that we would all like to see them at? Is it weather? Is it congestion? Is it the materials that are being used, or is it the industry practices that are being used to do the actual construction? What do you need work? What do we need to work on other than obviously dollars? But other than dollars, what are the other challenges?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the program actually speaks to two aspects. It certainly speaks to the financial elements, but it also speaks to the need for non-financial type of strategies, exactly to the point that you've mentioned, and that includes basically looking at our service levels, for example, in terms of managing expectations around to what level are we able to maintain our infrastructure. Certainly on the road side, we've certainly seen significant challenges related to the weather, and what I mean by that is when we're building the roads, basically the level of stress that we're subjecting those roads to is fairly significant. So basically in the summer we're dealing with plus 30-degree weather where the asphalt needs to stay strong enough so that it doesn't move around or deform. In a winter when we're dealing with minus 30, it still needs to be soft enough so that it doesn't start cracking, and we've certainly seen this year with a significant number of cycles of freeze-thaw that certainly put a lot of stress on our road. So what that forces us to do is continue to look at the quality of our construction practices and the quality of our materials. For example, last year we spent about $350,000 just on testing of our asphalt products on our construction projects. So it's certainly something that we take seriously. It's something that also is continually evolving. This year we've actually modified our construction specifications related to asphalt to continue to look at a product that at the end will provide us better longevity because of the factors I've mentioned in terms of either the traffic or the climate conditions that we're subjecting our roads to.
So the new asphalt, we're going to start using that, or we are using that this construction season?
Correct. This construction season requires additional testing of our asphalt. Testing that basically focuses on the longer-term performance of our asphalt mixes.
The other question that residents have raised for me is the road base itself. Their concern is whether we're going down deep enough and we're laying a significant enough base when we're rebuilding the roads. What do you say to that? Is that an issue for us? Is that something we need to look at, or are we following industry standards? How does that all fit in?
Well, we're certainly, Mr. Mayor, we're certainly following industry standards. When we're rebuilding the road, we're actually engineering the road based on the type of traffic that we're expecting that road to carry. Where we tend to find more challenges is when we're renewing some of the roads. So if we're only going in to resurface the road, when we resurface the road, we're not rebuilding the road. We're essentially taking the top layer of asphalt off, putting down a new layer. And if there are weaknesses in terms of the base, especially in terms of the pavement structure, that will tend to reflect, and that's where often we'll get concerns about, well, you just paved this road and we're starting to see some of the cracking occurring. And that predominantly is because we're not rebuilding the road. We're only removing a top lift and putting a new lift back. And that's part of the strategies in terms of maximizing the dollars that we have to try to extend the life of our assets, and in this case our roads asset, as long as we can. Because if we went in and we start rebuilding all of the roads every time we go in, we would be doing a lot fewer roads, and that would be a more expensive strategy than the strategy that we've been applying to date.
Okay, no, that's helpful, and it puts a frame around what the issue is, really. So, having said that, I know you and I have talked about this before, and your department is committed to going back and looking at some of those projects where we have seen the cracking or the deterioration sooner rather than later. In that process, have we learned anything that we can use to enhance, even when we're just going in and doing a resurfacing as opposed to rebuild? Have we learned some things that we can use going forward that will help to minimize that issue?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the effectiveness of our renewal strategy is something that we have underway right now. And as we identify opportunities, we're certainly building that into our renewal programs as we're moving forward. One of the examples is the additional asphalt testing that I initially spoke to. The effectiveness review that we're also doing is the type of renewal strategies that we're applying, and ensuring that basically we are getting the added life that we were expecting. So it's not always a question of was the product or the material good or not. It's also around the type of strategy that we applied. Is it giving us the return that we were expecting or anticipating? And that will continue to inform the strategies as we move forward.
Okay. Last question. My understanding is that when a contractor goes in and does a resurfacing, for example, we have a 1-year warranty, if you will. Is that something that we should revisit? Is that industry standard, or are we finding out that 18 months or 2 years down the road, that's when the problems are popping up? Is that a discussion that we need to have with the industry?
Mr. Mayor, that is an industry standard, although it is one that we have been discussing on certain types of projects. Should we be looking to add a longer warranty period, which tends to be more of what we call more of a performance-based approach. The challenge there is just making sure that we have very tight performance standards, because we know that there's many factors that will lead to the deterioration of a road over time. So the question is, how are we able to relate that back 2, 3, 4 years down the road on the actual quality construction versus the weather condition, the traffic, and the fact that if we're just resurfacing, we recognize that we're not rebuilding the road. So the warranty is really tied to the type of work that's being achieved in terms of what's reasonable. And certainly what we've applied is consistent with industry. But on reconstruction, that's certainly something that we've discussed, whether or not there's value to looking at extended warranty periods, but it's not something that we have implemented at this point.
So that's an ongoing discussion then. Something you're still considering? Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just follow up on Councillor Eglei's point with respect to the asphalt. I'm often stopped and asked about this study by a Queen's professor in Kingston. Can you tell me what they've done, what he has discovered or proposed, and is it working any better? Have we tried it? Is this an urban myth that the roads in Kingston are in much better shape than every other road in Canada because of this professor?
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, you're referring to Professor Hesp of Queen's University, and we've certainly had a number of discussions with Professor Hesp, who's also worked closely with the Ministry of Transportation in terms of updating our specifications. So some of the testing that we was mentioning about testing the product for longer longevity are basically testing that he was certainly promoting. So those are the tests that we've actually implemented as part of our 2017 specifications and are in alignment with the research that he has done. The reference to Kingston is only because basically Queen's University is in Kingston, and that they have done some pilots there. They've done different pilot sites with the MTO across the province, and it's really trying to implement measures that will test the product to see how will it perform over an extended period of time, recognizing that our roads are in place for 20, 30, 40 years before we actually get to resurface them.
I guess I'm just curious, what is his way of doing things that seems to be working better? As luck would have it, I'm going to Kingston on Thursday for my niece's graduation, so maybe I'll drive around the roads of Kingston to see if they're in top-notch shape. But what's he doing? Is he providing a different mix of oil and so on in the asphalt mix, or is it a different application process? And where are we doing the testing in Ottawa specifically?
So Mr. Mayor, his testing was on the liquid part of the asphalt. So when you look at the composition of asphalt is the pavement is made up of liquid asphalt, and then the rest is a combination of sand and granulars. So his testing focused on the liquid component of the liquid asphalt. His concern was basically whether or not additives were being added to the liquid mix, which would lead to premature cracking. So all of his focus has been on testing that liquid piece to make sure that basically we get a better product, which will lead to longer roads. One of the challenges that we have, though, is that even though that's improving the quality of the asphalt, when we're looking at quality of roads, it's looking at quality of construction and quality of all of the materials. So it's not just one element; it's really more of a holistic approach that will help to continue to provide roads that sustain the test of time.
But where actually are we testing a road with this?
What we've done is, as part of our 2017 specifications, which we've already had a suite of tests that we do on our asphalt, we've added the additional tests that Professor Hesp had defined, which are now part of our Ontario provincial specifications also. So those additional tests are now part of our testing regime for roads.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to have to there's a whole bunch of people on the list, so we'll put you down. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think there are a lot of worry signs in this report, and it's obviously good that we've reduced the shortfall, but the bad news is we haven't reduced the shortfall in accordance with the 2012 LRFP, so we've actually fallen behind, and that is a worry sign. And when I read the State of the Asset report, and although there's lots of information here, to me there's just not quite enough information because they're not broken down far enough to really be able to ascertain what's happening. For example, when I look at page 21, Parks and Rec of the State of the Asset report, I can't really see where, for example, tennis courts are in this. Are they in playgrounds?
Mr. Chair, correct. The tennis courts would fall under the playgrounds, and the intent of the report card is really to try to provide a snapshot of all of the city's assets. So the city has, basically, we're reporting on $42 billion worth of assets. They're all being reported based on services. And what we've tried to do is basically group and highlight some of the key asset groupings for each of the service areas. Mm-hmm. One of the element also, the other document that's appended to the report is a strategic asset management plan. And the next companion document to that will be each service will have an asset management plan each services. So at that point, we will be drilling down into reporting on the level of detail in a more granular
And when will we expect
level.
to see that?
When we're looking at the non-financial strategies that we need to continue to focus on, that's one of the strategies that we've identified, is that we need to continue to work on these service-based asset management plans. Those will be plans that we're going to be working on for the next few years.
Because, I mean, there's a lot of concern in this document as far as I'm concerned, and I know it's not just us, it's municipalities across the country that are very challenged to keep up with the infrastructure renewal. But when you see that, for example, 73% of our tennis courts are now at the end of their life cycle, and we probably missed that window to repair them in a costly fashion. And when I start reading things like asset rationalization in 2019, it just makes me wonder what's really happening here. Are we getting out of businesses because it's going to be demolition by neglect? Is that what's going to happen here because our assets are deteriorating beyond the point where we will financially be able to repair them?
So, Mr. Mayor, in 2012, and we certainly continue with that strategy, is what we're applying is really a risk-based approach to how we're managing investment decisions. So, assets that pose a higher risk to service are where we've been directing a lot of the funding. Other assets, we're letting them essentially run to failure before we go in to renew them, and that's trying to balance basically the level of risk.
Right.
The asset rationalization is certainly part of, and that's an ongoing process that's part of the non-financial strategies in terms of when assets get near the end of their life. There is a decision point to be made in terms of, do we re-engage in that asset or do we disengage? Is there a different way that we're able to provide that service? Are there partnerships that could be done before we go in and we put more investments to reinstate those assets?
And I know that this is a conversation we're going to have, but, I mean, the reason we're in a lot of these businesses like recreation facilities is because not all of our residents can afford to join Movati Gym, and so we try and provide these services on a cost-effective basis, and if we just run them out of life, so we have to close them, I think this is a real worry sign for the future of this municipality. So I really feel that we need to pay close attention to what's happening here. When I look on page 21 and see that our aquatic facilities are in poor or fair condition, it makes me wonder, are we going to see other pool closures like we saw at Crestview? Is it like, I can't ascertain from this report how serious the situation has become at this point.
So, Mr. Mayor, certainly our assets are safe. So that is one of the category conclusions here, is that our assets are safe. We have about 83% of our assets that are deemed to be in fair to very good condition. Do we need to have sustained investments? Absolutely, we need to have sustained investments. But I think when we look at what this council has done over the last number of years, and even dating back to 2002 and 2003, where we started really having an asset management mindset and a long-range financial planning mindset, it's really been around positioning the organization to be in a more sustainable position moving forward. It doesn't mean that we have everything fully addressed in terms of gaps in investment levels, but we have the right strategies in place. We have the federal and the provincial governments that are imposing increasing requirements around asset management planning. And we are very well positioned to be able to respond to that. So I think we have the right strategies in place, and as we see the continued gradual increase in the funding, which what we've always promoted is a sustainable, predictable funding source instead of having large blips. That's really going to be the path to get us to sustainability.
And I completely agree. Municipalities just don't have enough money. There's no doubt about that. And if the upper-tier governments provided more sustainable, predictable funding, we would be able to do a much better job at maintaining our assets and being able to work through all of this. So, I mean, indeed, we are very challenged. I have no doubt about that. But let's talk about roads for a minute, because our strategy has been to spend the dollars that we have available on arterial roads, sort of to the detriment of the lower volume roads like local streets. So I guess I'm wondering at this point, are we close to catching up on arterial roads and we can start repairing some of the local streets, or are we years away from dealing with our arterial roads?
Mr. Mayor, again, when we look at, to your point, applying a risk-based approach means that we're directing more investments to arterials, major collectors. As we get more control, I guess, on those types of assets, then we're going to be able to direct more investments to more community-type infrastructure, such as our local roads. Right now, on an annual basis, we spend about 5% of our resurfacing budget on local streets. What we're expecting is, as we align to the funding strategy and we see increases in funding, that 5% will start to increase, where we're going to start to be able to direct more funding to local streets. In some cases,
are we years away from that?
Well, within that 10-year plan, we still have certainly the first, I would say the first half will still be focused on addressing the higher priority roads, because we still have arterials and major collectors that are certainly in need of attention, where we would be directing the funding to those assets. But the plan does include provisions that as we get closer to the level of funding that we should be investing annually, that there will be a higher share that's going to be allocated to local streets.
But that will be in the latter part of the 10-year plan.
At this point, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Gancier. I believe we had that discussion before when the Auditor General released his report about the quality of the asphalt. It's not just probably I'm talking about the Ontario Ombudsman when or the Auditor of Ontario when he released his report. So speaking of the decline in inequality of the asphalt right across the province. So there's nothing really unique. Just here in Ottawa we have this. So it's right across. Have you, working with other colleagues across the province on this issue in the recommendation of the Ontario Auditor General?
Mr. Mayor, absolutely. So we do work closely with our other municipal partners. We work closely also with the MTO in terms of when we're looking at improvements to our asphalt technology and some of our practices. We've certainly studied very closely the audit recommendations from the province, which go beyond also just quality of asphalt. There's certainly a number of measures that were included in there, and it's certainly something that we're always continuing looking at in terms of our procurement practices, our testing practices, ensuring that we've got impartiality in terms of the work that's being done and the quality assurance. So those are always elements that we are looking at, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that we continue to deliver value for the dollars that are being invested in all of our assets.
One of the area, and it seems like I heard the concern because I sit on the rural municipality of Ontario, which they have the most roads in their area, and one of the problem is right across the province, not just unique to Ottawa. It's the same people manufacturing asphalt. It's the same people who building the road. It's the same people who own the quarries. It's the same people who own the sand pit and the granule pit. So there's not a much variety or choices out there. It's the same group you're dealing with right across the province, and even in our city, we know it's only a handful. So I'm wondering what other province beside Ontario do when it comes to this, because clearly we're hearing from our colleague the road is not lasting half the time used to last before, and we hear from our own city as well. Like, I mean, those roads, they used to, in the past, a good base road should last between 16 to 18, 20 years. Well, now lucky if you get 10, 12 out of it. So okay, I know a lot of people is going to say, oh, blaming the environment and the change in weather. But even in the area when we have a better weather than Ottawa, like the GTA area, they're no better, their roads is no better than ours. And I'm not going to single out Kingston because there's a couple of pilot projects. I send you all the material from that professor, but that's only one area, one pilot project, and I think it's different when you talk about a massive road like the city of Ottawa. But I'd like to know, is any effort on a high level, not just Ottawa alone, Ottawa and all the big municipality or the rest of the municipality of the province?
So, Mr. Mayor, I think it's been mentioned a few times that it's not unique to Ottawa. Basically, I was involved on the Report Card Advisory Board, and municipalities across the country are dealing with basically challenges in terms of infrastructure investments and ensuring that we get quality products. So we do work very closely with our other partners, and we do a lot of testing in terms of our materials to ensure that basically the products that we get are the products that we were asking for. I think part of the challenge also in terms of longevity is if we're resurfacing the road, there's an assumption that because we resurfaced the road that it's a new road. Well, it's not a new road. We've resurfaced the road. There's some deterioration built into the road that at some point resurfacing won't be an appropriate strategy where we're going to need to get into rebuilding, which means that as the road deteriorates, even though we resurface, some of the imperfections in that road will reflect back up, and that's where we apply other strategies in terms of crack sealing and microsurfacing to try to extend the life of that road. So it's not always a question of we're getting an inferior product, it's just a recognition of the intent of that strategy in terms of how much life we can get out of it. So those are things that we continue to look at. That's why we have a very mixed approach when it comes to renewal roads. On some roads, we will apply strategies or interventions when the road is in better condition, because what we're trying to do is really extend the life of that road before it gets to the point that we even need to resurface. But there's no doubt that as we let some of our roads deteriorate too much, if we're only resurfacing, then if that part of that base has been deteriorated, yeah, it's going to show up on the surface certainly a lot sooner. But that's part of trying to balance basically the investments that we have to try to really maximize and extend the life of those assets as much as we can. And when I was talking about level of service, it's also about managing expectations around what can we expect, what condition we can expect from our different assets.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Blais, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So I know you went back and forth with the Mayor quite a bit about this pilot project and this research that the professor at Queen's has recommended, but it was not clear to me where we're testing it in Ottawa. So where are we testing it in Ottawa?
So, Mr. Mayor, on all of our resurfacing projects, our road projects where we have asphalt in 2017, we will be applying those tests. So it's not just a pilot. We've actually updated our construction specifications to include that requirement.
So this professor's technique, whatever it is that he does to the liquid, is being used in all resurfacing projects this year? Is that what you're saying?
The testing requirements have been added, yes, to all
testing.
of our...
And what is the difference between adding the testing requirements versus adding what he does?
As I indicated to Mr. Mayor, Professor Hess did not develop a new product. What he's refined is basically some of the testing procedures for the liquid component of the asphalt. Okay. So it's not a new additive, it's not a new product, okay. It's more how we're testing it.
Perfect.
To ensure that the materials that we get are testing for properties of the liquid that should be able to provide longer longevity in terms of and those are the additional testing that we've actually built into our specifications for this year.
Okay, and the results of the testing are available to you when?
On every project as we test. Like I said, we've always been testing our roads. This is an additional suite of testing that we're adding to it.
Okay, so this year we're resurfacing Dunning Road in Cumberland. Are you testing it before the asphalt's laid, or are you testing it afterwards? How long afterwards?
Both. There's tests that we do on the liquid part, we actually do before, and then we also do tests once the material has been placed. So there's two series of tests.
Is there a period of time after it's been laid where you test? You do test when the project's done, and then you wait 6 months for cars to drive over it? Like how in depth does the testing go?
So the testing that we'll do on the asphalt after the construction is done is we do it immediately after the material has been placed.
Okay.
Because what we need to confirm is that the material does meet our requirements. If it doesn't,
Okay.
then that's when we look at either penalties or having to replace and remove the material.
Okay, but then how do we test, or do we not test for whether or not the material that was used on that particular project is actually lasting? Other than it doesn't meet the one-year warranty that the councillor was mentioning, or other factors, do we go back and test it at certain intervals to ensure that we're getting the lifespan out of it we expect?
So, Mr. Mayor, once we've tested the actual products to confirm that the products that we're getting are in conformance with our specifications, beyond the warranty period, that's where it falls into our regular inspection cycles, where all of our arterial roads are inspected for condition every 3 years. The rest of the roads are on a 5-year basis. And as I was explaining to Councillor Eglai, what we're also looking at right now is the effectiveness of our renewal strategies to make sure that the strategies that we're adopting, that we're applying, that we're actually getting the return that we're expecting from those strategies. And that will help to inform and improve basically some of the strategies that we put forward.
Sure. When are you anticipating a review and renewal of our standards?
So, which standards, Mr. Mayor?
Construction material standards, performance standards, etc.
So,
yeah.
So we've done 2 levels of review. As part of the Building Better Suburbs and the Infrastructure Standards Review, there have been review of some of the standards. As I was mentioning, this year we've updated our construction specifications for asphalt, and right now we're going through a whole review of all of our specifications to ensure that they continue to be aligned with our interior provincial standards.
So when would you expect the specifications review to be complete?
Well, it's an ongoing process. So on the asphalt, we've already implemented additional measures, so those are in place now. We're continuing to look at other specifications as part of our contracts.
Have we ever considered either testing or transitioning to concrete surface for roadways?
So, Mr. Mayor, when we look at the type of renewal strategies, we do look at basically different materials. We'll look at basically the appropriateness of concrete versus asphalt, and that's typically tied to the type of road that we're looking at building. So we don't build a lot of concrete-based roads in the city, especially when it comes to local and collector streets, because they tend to get cut up. Certainly a lot more for service connections, but it's certainly something that, as we're looking for, when we're looking at the 174s, for example, those are strategies that we would be looking at to see which one will provide us with the best life cycle cost at the end. Because that's really when we're looking at the build of new roads, we're trying to look at what's going to be the approach that's going to give us the best life cycle cost, not just the initial cost of construction.
Sure. And so, but when utilities, when there are cuts through locals or collectors, etc., why does a concrete road provide more difficulty to the city in those? Because those are generally done by third parties who have to replace that at their own expense. So why do we care about that?
So, Mr. Mayor, it could be to third parties, but it could also be to the city if we have to go access the infrastructure
to do repairs.
We
don't have to do that, right?
Yeah, but there's always repairs that come up after the fact. The only more difficulty there is basically having to cut through a base. We have concrete bases also in the city. Riverside Drive was a concrete base. Carling Avenue was a concrete base. And what we've seen on those roads is over time, parts of the 174 is a concrete base. And what we see over time is as the concrete deteriorates, you start to see a lot more movement of that. Sure. Of the concrete. So there are pros and cons also to these different products. It's not just basically higher difficulty in terms of accessing to replace utilities, for example.
Okay, so if a home builder who is building a subdivision and is responsible for the construction of the roads came forward and said, we want to build this collector as a concrete road for whatever their own reasons were for that, would we fight them on that?
No, we would entertain that building concrete-based roads is not an uncommon requirement. It's not typically applied here at the city, especially for local streets, but would we consider it? Absolutely.
I'm thinking major collectors where the buses are going to be running, at a decent clip as we're getting people to LRT, these new roads that aren't built yet.
Yeah. No, those are the things that we do look at.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ray.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Mayor. I wanted to follow up on some questions as well with respect to the roads, and particularly with respect to the effects that intensification in our urban neighborhoods is having on roads. Many of the roads, as the single-family homes come down, the new semi-detached go up, greater congestion. I'm certain that a lot of our residential roads are seeing more traffic than perhaps we had anticipated. The road cuts that get made in the course of putting the infills in has got to be a relatively significant factor in reducing the lifespan of some of those roads. And we're seeing heavy construction traffic for sometimes years at a time. Some of the poster child roads in our ward would include like Patricia, which has been subject to a lot of really heavy construction traffic associated with developments nearby. Are we collecting enough from developers to mitigate the cost to taxpayers of the effects of intensification on our urban roads? Some of these roads are beginning to look like they've been bombed with no hope of a rebuild or even resurfacing anytime in the near future. It's a concern to the residents of our ward, and I hope we have a strategy to try to deal with this rapid intensification of the urban wards and the effect that it is having on our roads.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll let Isabel speak maybe more on the DC part in terms of collecting funds from developers, but in terms of the intensification, having more cars on the road, cars are not necessarily the ones that make roads deteriorate. It tends to be heavier traffic, tends to be buses, tends to be trucks, tends to be also the weather. Intensification areas are also often, it's not just adding cars, but alternate modes of transportation also. So there's a bit of a balance there. But typically adding cars to a section of local street is not a big contributor to deteriorating the roads, because the roads are built to be able to withstand that type of traffic.
But the road cuts and the heavy construction traffic, on any given street in Westboro, in Champlain Park, in Hintonburg this summer, there will be 2 or 3 more road cuts made, incremental to the road cuts that have been made over each of the course of the past 5-10 years. That's got to be reducing the life cycle of our streets, and I'm not seeing the repairs being made to a standard that residents expect, and I'm not seeing the life cycle replacement of those roads maintaining the streets to a standard that we would expect.
So certainly the road cuts have an impact on the quality of the roads. That's why, as part of our road activity bylaw, we have a pavement degradation fee. So every time a road is cut, there's a fee that's collected for the reduction in life that cut is providing on the road, and we are in the process of reviewing the whole pavement degradation fee structure to ensure that we recover enough dollars to be able to recover for the deterioration that we're seeing from the cuts. And I think Mr. Willis also wanted to chime in.
Mr. Mayor, I'd also add a few additional comments. A lot of the roads that you're actually referring to, part of it has to do with the age of the actual infrastructure, and that it's in a band of the city that was built during rapid development periods, and that they're all hitting the same end of their life cycle at the same time. And so there is sort of an underlying problem about getting around to those in terms of the renewal programs, which we will do. As Mr. Gontier has indicated, in terms of our road activities bylaw and the fees we can charge for cuts, we do believe we should be going back and reviewing those numbers and trying to do it. We can't recoup through development charges bylaw very much for this type of work because it is an ineligible cost under the legislation as it's currently written in Ontario. Right. So we're not saying that there isn't an issue in these areas, and there is certain pressure from the heavier truck traffic and the cuts into it, but a lot of it has to actually do with the basic age of those roads in the first place, and that actually is the real issue we need to tackle.
It is becoming daunting or dismaying to tell residents on streets like Broadview, streets like Tweedsmuir, Golden Avenue, that, yes, the infills have been going in, the road cuts have been made, the roads are now failing, and there is no forecast for any kind of even resurfacing in the course of the next 5 to 7 years, which tells me that we are not, if we're collecting fees against the need to repair those roads, they're not being spent on that right now. So it's a concern that I wanted to raise. The other concern that residents have been raising with respect to maintenance of our assets is the decorative brick around the ward, both the sidewalks, crosswalks, where the bricks are failing, and we don't have the funds necessary to replace those properly. So we're simply slapping cold pack or asphalt on those, which leads to a bad enough looking situation that I've actually asked staff on any of our new builds not to use the decorative bricks, because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to find the funds to maintain those. How are we going to add decorative elements in future street projects without using those bricks, or do we have a plan to fund properly the maintenance of some of those decorative public realm elements?
So, Mr. Mayor, as part of when we look at our construction specifications review, we look at the performance of some of the material, and certainly the bricks is one that's been highlighted as being an area that it looks nice when it's built, but as it deteriorates, it becomes very difficult to maintain. So we are looking at different ways of still trying to achieve the same look and feel, but through the different products. An example is stamped concrete. Some of the crosswalks that we've built have been built more with stamped concrete. So you get a similar look, but a very different performance, which means that from a maintenance perspective, a lot easier to maintain. And that's why when we look at the comprehensive asset management approach, it's really looking at how does the organization work together to make sure that what we build in the first place that we're able to sustain over time. And part of it is lessons learned, and then how do we modify our standards to make sure that we try to reduce the cost of maintenance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to build a little bit on what Councillor Lieber was talking about. All of us have got older places in our areas that we can be part of the solution. For example, the Walter Baker is almost 40 years old, and I've been spending a lot of my cash in lieu of parklands on things to improve the Walter Baker, which is a 200,000 square foot facility, and we are able to use our funds for things to improve older things while we're waiting for or accommodating the fact that the city can't pay or can't repair at the speed we'd like them to. Isn't that true? We can do that? We can invest our cash in lieu. I know Kevin is the keeper of cash in lieu, and Dan's here too. But I mean, in our cases, we do have some control over those tools to use in our own areas, and we can use bits and pieces. I'm improving the field house at the Ken Ross Park now to move the senior center there, and it's an investment that I'm taking out of my cash in lieu. But if I didn't, it could not get done, and that reality. So are you seeing that across the city, or do you think that some councillors may not be aware that they can benefit their neighborhoods with their cash in lieu, no matter whether it's $25,000 or whether it's $2 million in the case of the downtown people?
Mr. Mayor, we've seen, especially with council expanding the application of cash in lieu funding, we've certainly seen areas where the councillors have taken the opportunity to take some of those investments to refresh some of their community assets. So, yes.
Just another thing, I think that we saw a couple of terms ago, I think, where we were building things that were built on how beautiful they were as far as how fundamentally they worked for the city and for the people that live there. And when we did that, we learned that disaster was awaiting on some of the architectural demands on something that we, could have built simpler. My question is, have we undertaken a plan or undertaken a study of how we build, whether it's roundabouts, whether it's sidewalks, whether it's field houses, whether it's bridges, whether it's anything like that, that we are taking a basic model, sort of like the Catholic School Board does, Mr. Mayor, where they have that common architectural drawing, and then you can augment it. They change the colors, they change whatever, they color the concrete, they stamp the concrete, they do those kinds of things. Have we come up with a plan that says, here's your shopping list, so that there's no expectations in communities and that set us down a road that we can't quite frankly afford? Not only it adds to the cost of building it, and sometimes there's room for that with the contingency in that to add to it, but the operating costs annually are significantly higher when you have something, for example, the boulevard on Longfields Drive, which looked beautiful when they built it from Mother Teresa to Woodruff Avenue, but that cannot be maintained with the equipment that we have in the city for landscaping. So now, what does it look like? Crap, right? And to the point where, in some of the roundabouts that I have in Barrhaven, and I have more than anybody else does because we were the first ones to take them in, where honestly I feel like they're so problematic to be maintained, even though they looked lovely in the beginning with those pavers and all that stuff, that we, I feel like going and standing and starting to clean one and saying, hey, if you got 5 minutes, come out and join me and pull some weeds. My point is that do we have a standard? Have we got to the point now where we have a basic standard so that your team says, here's your shopping list for a new field house, here's your shopping list for a roundabout. This is what it looks like, what you choose to do over and above that, but this is what we're going to deliver and what we can maintain. And if we haven't done that, is that something you would think we should?
Mr. Mayor, that's certainly an ongoing process, so we definitely do have standards. Sometimes it's how those standards are being applied. And on a lot of the projects, what we do are also constructability reviews. So basically, we look at the ability to construct, and then how we're going to be able to maintain that infrastructure over time. Examples of that are some of the recent fire stations that we've built. Instead of trying to build every fire station being a different fire station, we have one model that we've replicated into areas. We've done that also in terms of some of our parks facilities, where we can develop a product that the organization is comfortable that we can sustain and maintain, and then we apply that elsewhere instead of trying to create uniqueness everywhere. Constructability review in terms of the Fifth Clegg pedestrian bridge, where when we started off we had a lot more complex bridge in terms of building a curved bridge. We've simplified the design. It still meets the whole context of the UNESCO site, but certainly a lot simpler to build. So it is something that we are embedding more and more into the organization. And part of that is basically ensuring that we talk to each other when we are looking at planning, building, and maintaining assets, is that we can gain from that collective knowledge, and that's part of an ongoing dialogue.
Because I would hate to see, like, if you look at the Hunt Club Bridge, which is a very, very basic bridge, but it functions extremely well given the volume of traffic, you could make it prettier by putting something at the front, something at the back of it, to change the look leaving and entering. But I would not want to see a situation where we have a standard that is, when it comes into a community that's going to be that the councillor doesn't defend. The councillor should be defending the standard, and that's why I think it's important we have a standard that's not flexible, that we can either augment with funding from another source or say that this is the standard. I think it's easier for us as well. I mean, if you have expectations, if somebody says, well, I want a pedestrian bridge like the one that goes over from Councillor Brockington to Councillor Dean's, and the people say, and we go, hold the horses, you're not going to, we're not doing that anymore. But I think that having the standard allows the same councillors to say, this is our standard, and also we can therefore deliver on these projects ahead of time. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So on the report, carried. Next is the long-range financial plan. I can't recall who asked that this be held. Was that Councillor Hubley?
I don't know, but I have questions, but I would like to have a presentation.
Okay. So, Isabella, do you have a presentation? Okay. Go ahead. Mr. Gauthier.
Mr. Mayor, before my colleagues walk away, I just wanted to recognize to my left Kelly Martin, the Manager of Asset Management, and to his left Patrick Brisson, the Program Manager of Strategic Asset Management. They've been really leaders in this organization in terms of advancing our asset management practices, and I just wanted to make sure that their efforts were being recognized today.
Great. Thank you. So I think our Deputy Treasurer has a presentation, a slide deck on, or is it a verbal report? A slide deck, okay.
Just getting somebody to flip the charts for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this presentation summarizes the results and recommendations of the recently completed long-range financial plan for tax-supported capital. The objective of this report is to present a 10-year outlook of the tax-supported capital requirements for the delivery of city services. In particular, this report focuses on the funding strategies that are required to provide for the renewal and maintenance of the city's existing asset base in a state of good repair, as discussed in the Comprehensive Asset Management Report. The current funding level is lower than what is required, but we have put in place strategies to reduce that gap, and this most current plan provides an update on what needs to be done over the next 10 years to continue to address it. In the previous 2012 long-range financial plan, it was determined that the overall funding gap was approximately $85 million per year. We needed $159 million per year to maintain assets in a state of good repair, but funding from tax and debt combined was $74 million per year. To address this gap, Council approved several strategies to increase the funding by inflation each year, increase funding by $4.5 million each year from the city's annual tax target, add $1 million each year to account for growth in the asset base, redirect $15 million from the strategic initiatives for the asset renewal program, and seek $25 million in permanent annual funding from senior governments. Le dernier plan financier à long terme en date relevait un besoin d'augmenter le financement fiscal des projets de renouvellement des immobilisations. À l'époque, la hausse a été estimée à 800 millions sur 10 ans. Les stratégies étaient proposées pour remédier ce problème. Although we have not been able to secure permanent funding from other levels of government, we have received a significant amount of funding from both the federal and provincial governments for one-time stimulus projects that have helped to advance or enhance cities' investments in capital infrastructure. Recently, Ottawa has received commitments of $227.3 million in new or enhanced transit projects, $115.3 million in water and wastewater projects, and $35.4 million in affordable and social housing projects from the New Building Canada Fund. As a result of implementing those strategies in 2012, the city has increased contributions to the asset renewal envelope by $51 million over the past 5 years. The annual increase from the tax target of $4.5 million per year has increased funding by $22.5. The additional amount for growth has amounted to an additional $4.5 million, and the one-time reallocation of strategic initiative funding of $15 million has increased the envelope by $42 million. In addition to these contributions, the envelope has been increased each year by the Construction Price Index for a total of $9 million per year. As reported in the Comprehensive Asset Management Report, there is an average annual asset renewal need of $195 million for tax-supported capital requirements. In 2012, the need was $159, but if we increase this amount by inflation, it equates to $171 million. In 2017 dollars. Therefore, the asset renewal requirements have increased by $24 million since 2012. The current funding level for asset renewal in 2017 dollars is $125 million and has increased by $45 million since 2012. So we have managed to reduce the overall funding gap by $21 million from $91 million in 2012 converted to 2017 dollars, compared to a revised gap of $70 million. This report recommends several strategies to address this gap. On a développé plusieurs stratégies financières pour combler l'écart de 70 millions. Poursuivre la hausse dans le respect des objectifs fiscaux de 4,5 millions. Poursuivre l'augmentation annuelle au rythme de l'expansion des infrastructures de 1 million. Ajouter un financement ponctuel des priorités du Conseil en 2018 de 5 millions et ajouter une hausse annuelle en 2019 dans le respect des objectifs fiscaux de 2,3 millions. The first recommendation is to continue to increase the renewal envelope within the tax target each year by $4.5 million. As well, continue to increase the envelope by $1 million to reflect growth in the asset base. As in the previous long-range financial plan and in line with the priorities of Council, staff recommend a one-time increase of $5 million from the Strategic Initiatives envelope in 2018. In order to reach the $195 million funding level within the next 10 years, an additional $2.3 million will be required each year starting in 2019. This strategy does not depend on securing permanent funding from other levels of government. However, we do recommend that the City continue to pursue this additional funding to reduce the additional amount that must be put aside for asset renewal each year from tax targets. What should be noted is that we would continue to increase the envelope by inflation in each year so that we don't fall behind in real dollars. The strategies established in the 2012 Long-Range Financial Plan have helped to reduce the funding gap, but we would not have closed that gap based on the revised asset renewal requirements. Over the next 10 years, we would have been short by approximately $26 million. This revised strategy ensures that we achieve the funding level to maintain assets in a state of good repair within the 10 years. Of course, circumstances change over time, and that is why a long-range financial plan is developed within each term of council and updated to reflect the current need. As was proposed in the CAM report, we should not just rely on financial strategies to address the funding gap, but also explore the non-financial strategies to help reduce the overall asset renewal investment requirements. These non-financial strategies will be presented to Council next term, as recommended in the CAM report. The long-range financial plan will also be updated to reflect the financial impact of implementing any of these recommended non-financial strategies. This report recommends that the debt limits for tax-supported capital works continue to be limited to the amount of debt retiring within the year. Therefore, there is no planned increases to debt resulting from the recommendations made in this report. Council received an assessment of the debt profile against the provincial debt servicing limits in the March 2017 transit LRFP, and since this tax LRFP recommends limiting debt to the amount of debt retiring within the year, the tax LRFP does not add any additional debt pressure than what was reported in March. Debt is projected to remain within the 7.5% limit, reaching a maximum of only 6.1%, including transit. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much. As other people mentioned, it's good to see that we're reducing that gap and that we have some strategies going forward to do it. But even with the work we've done, we still have a gap of, what is it, $70 million a year that we've got to meet. And you set out in the report some ideas as to how to tackle this going forward. One of the things that I wanted to ask about, which we don't seem to be considering, is I know some other cities have looked at or have already implemented the concept of a levy, specifically for infrastructure or roads. We don't seem to be recommending that. I'm just curious as to why we don't want to go down that road, so to speak.
We had Larry before.
I know.
We did it.
Mr. Mayor, I'll answer that. We haven't called it a levy, but what we're recommending is that out of the tax increase you have every year, you dedicate $7.8 million of it towards. So you could say that's basically a 0.5%. You're dedicating a 0.5% to increase the contribution to capital every year.
Okay, no, thank you for the, often things are semantics, so thank you for that clarification. That would be that'd be a fixed contribution every year and wouldn't be spent on anything but road repair. Is that the plan then?
For overall asset renewal.
Oh, sorry, overall asset renewal. Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Great. That's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I actually think this report and the State of the Asset report are two of the most important reports that we will deal with this term of council, because everywhere I go, and I suspect it's the same for every member of council, people are talking about the noticeable decline in the state of the city's assets. In 2012, the LRFP report said that if we didn't get $25 million annually from upper tier governments, guaranteed stable, predictable, sustainable funding, that we would look at an infrastructure levy. So it's silent on this, and I heard what Ms. Similek said, but if you're talking about a 2% tax increase cap, I'm not sure that I could really call that a levy, because it's just cutting somewhere else in the organization. It's paying Peter to pay Paul. So I do think at some point we're going to have to talk about this, and I'm particularly concerned about the references in here to asset rationalization starting in 2019, because I, as a member of council, want to know what businesses we're getting out of. That's really important to me, and you know, I said it earlier in the conversation, but you know, we frown upon developers who have heritage buildings and allow them to deteriorate to the point where we have no choice but allow them to demolish them. And now it feels like some of our assets, we're going down the very same path. We're just letting them fall into such disrepair, and we've missed the window in many cases to repair them in a timely fashion. It's like the roof that you have a leak, and if you don't repair that leak, you're into a new roof, and if the water's gotten in and there's mold in the building, you're into major costs. And that's kind of what I see happening with the state of our assets. And so I think it's incumbent upon this council to really be sure that we're making smart investments in a timely fashion, and at the end of the day, it's just not going to cost the taxpayers a whole lot more money because we've allowed things to deteriorate. And that's what has me really concerned about these reports and what we're seeing. And I think it's a really tough conversation to have, like Councillor Eglai was saying, talking about an infrastructure levy, but I think we have to at least understand, if we're not going to have an infrastructure levy, what else is going to give in order for that money to be directed, and is it enough, and is it timely enough? And I really think that there needs to be a lot of consideration for how we move forward. I do have some specific questions. One of them is in the $1 million allocated for growth in the asset base. It seemed like a number that was kind of hanging out there in the report without any real analysis of whether $1 million is the right number or not. So how did we arrive at that number?
You're absolutely correct. It is just a number that's hanging out there. We added it in 2012. The number that really is important is the number that Alain Grantier and his group come up with, which is what is the total need, because they reflect the asset base at that point in time. So they've come up with their 195, and then our job is to find, so what are we spending today, what's the gap, and how to bridge it. So we really don't have a good assessment as to what we should be adding every year as a result of growth, but we rely on the updated number that he has, which includes all of the assets at that point in time.
Okay. In this report, there are a number of examples given of different municipalities, and I thought it was a little strange that they're all the very same examples that were used in 2012. And I thought maybe we could have, 5 years later, had some fresh examples with a little bit more information than just lifting the 2012 examples and plopping them into the 2017 report. But, for example, Mississauga, back in 2012, implemented a 2% infrastructure levy. I would have liked to know what impact that has had on the state of the assets in the city of Mississauga. Has that put them in a much better position than we're in, or not? So do we have that information?
Mr. Mayor, no, we don't have that information, but we can get that. We can go and do some more research on that and provide that to you before this goes to council in a week's time.
Okay. I also think, because of the state of our assets and the concern that the community has for the state of our assets, I would like to see us, in advance of each budget year, have an update, an LRFP update on the state of our assets compared to our targets, so that we can see in any given year if we're falling further behind. Would that be something that would be possible?
In order to do that, I would think you would need a refreshed number coming from the engineering group as to what we should be investing. The work that it takes for them to do this their comprehensive asset management report is pretty extensive. I don't know if they could reproduce that every 12 months. So I would refer this to Mr. Gontier to say whether he's able to do that or not.
Mr. Mayor, there's certainly a fair amount of effort to refresh this document. Certainly, as we're moving through time, we're finding more effective ways of updating the information, but there is a lot of information to be collected to be able to report on an annual basis. The other challenge also is that from year to year, you won't see a significant difference also in terms of some of these assets. A lot of them are long-lived assets, so on an annual basis, you may not see a big difference. What we've been benchmarking is against the strategy. So year to year, are we following the strategy that was adopted by council?
But are you, year over year, like in your department, do you see worry signs? Do you see information that all of a sudden you go, well, that's a problem that we didn't anticipate? Like, is there information that you see within those 5-year windows that council, it would be useful for council to have in setting our budgets?
Mr. Mayor, certainly if we saw anything drastic, we would be bringing that back to council. But the information that we present is certainly based on a lot of information, a lot of knowledge in terms of the state of the assets, but also some of the investment priorities. So one of the big area that we focused on since 2012, for example, was really updating our risk assessments of all of our assets to understand which ones were more critical assets, so that the investments that we have may be the same amount of investments, but that those are really being directed to assets that pose a higher risk to service. What you've seen, an example of that is basically the amount of investments that we've been doing in terms of culverts, for example, where in 2012 we identified that was an area where significant investments needed to be made to upgrade the condition of our culverts, especially in the rural areas. And since that time, we've seen a significant increase in terms of the number of investments that have been made. And you can see from the results that it has paid dividends. We have seen improvements, and we will continue to see improvements on that front.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. Just one question. On page 8 of the report, it notes that in order to address the shortfall, it's suggesting that we would take $5 million in 2018 from strategic initiatives. I presume that would be a direction to staff going into the budget process. Have we given any thought to which strategic initiative that might come from, or how that funding would be achieved, or have I misunderstood what that says?
This is money that's actually not being allocated in 2018. It was strategic initiative money that is, the project has ended, so it's coming back. So it's not affecting any other project.
Okay.
It's basically, I hate to use the term free money, but that's basically what it is. It's room within your existing budget.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
It would be something like, obviously, the 2017 program is finished in 2017.
Just closed out a number of projects, so coming from there.
Okay, on the report. Carried. Thank you. Item 10, Councillor Leeper, did you hold item 10? No? Oh, Councillor Eglai. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. So I went through the report, and I'm not sure if directed to the clerk or who can answer the questions, but
or the treasurer.
So basically what you're proposing is the same sort of model we had last year, that there would be staff support if there are joint presentations of councillors, is that, and a budget set aside for councillors to hold the meetings, is that?
That's correct.
And what are the timelines? I believe last year you had indicated to us you needed to know by a certain date when you wanted to, and I couldn't find that in this report. Maybe I missed it.
I'll have a memo going out to you as soon as this is approved actually it's to be received. So I'll have a memo going out, I think, next week to you, specifying the timelines. Typically, we like to know by the end of July, but that didn't seem to work last year, so maybe we'll make it the end of August.
Fair enough. I was just trying to get some clarity on the process. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to to ask, Councillor Hubley did not go this route last year. He used an online tool, and I'm wondering how successful that was in his approach, because I do not find the process we're using now to be effective. I don't. I mean, as somebody who's been around a long time and has been part of many, many budgets, I think that the way that we've always met in Nepean, for example, always, so it's not like there's anything new. We've always met at the Nepean Sportsplex. Some of the faces around the table have changed. Some of the mayors have changed in all these times, but we've always been at the Sportsplex. And the numbers every year go down and down and down, which could be because people are, with this, are reaching out as they have questions and are more engaged. We certainly are connecting. I do an e-blast every 2 weeks. I'm telling people a ton of stuff. Maybe that's it. But I don't believe last year there was even one person from Barrhaven, which is literally, you could ride your bike easily, even if you were me, from Barrhaven to the Nepean Sportsplex on a separated MUP, right? Right from Barrhaven. So, and then I think the timing was off last year as well for when we were doing that. But I found that we had the same people that seemed to be, a lot of them traveling from budget meeting to budget meeting to budget meeting. I just don't know how effective that is, and I was wondering if this could be an opportunity for Councillor Hubley to say what the reaction he had by not doing a public one and by going online.
Right. Councillor, do you want to explain your experience?
Thank you, Councillor Harder and Mr. Mayor, for a chance to respond. I'll say the online did work. I'll do it again. We had both. My colleague in the north did the public meeting that there was low attendance, very low. I know, Mr. Mayor, you've attended those meetings as well, and Councillor El-Shantiri. But by opening up online, there was more comments that came in. So I think the residents found that helpful. They were able to get their information. The other thing is the city experimented last year with that budget tool, which, while we didn't get tens of thousands of users, we did get very good, at least in my area, I got very good positive feedback from residents that I directed to that tool. So,
and I think the other experience, certainly my experience over the years, has been if people are upset about a budget, they'll come out in big numbers. You remember, Councillor, the cuts to the arts funding many years ago, and there were, the room was filled. So the general human nature is if people generally are pleased with what is before them, they tend not to show up. If they're upset, they do show up, and they let us know.
You're right. So, for example, the biggest one that attracted people to Nepean Sportsplex was the threat to close the Knoxdale fire station. Without question. I think we had 175 people. So they were motivated by an issue that was very local. Anyway, I'm just wondering if maybe staff could give us a bit more help if we want to do the online version. It will obviously save you money because you won't be paying for, something in every part of the city. I just think that it's a way for those of us who do connect electronically with many of our residents. I think it's a way that we can reach out and give them a heads up so that kind of like engage them earlier rather than have a bunch of people or a few people show up to the Nepean Sportsplex in my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And let's not forget, last year we did the budget consultation before we tabled the budget. So it's a little hard for people to come out and complain about what they saw in the budget. My only question is, last year we were supposed to have budget review board meetings in advance of the tabling of the budget, and they all got canceled. So can we expect this year that those will be reinstated?
In the report, Mr. Mayor, there's two meetings, one with the mayor, then each councillor with the mayor, then myself and the general managers will meet with each committee chair, and then the budget review board will meet just as a budget review board to review the budget without the committee chairs. So the process of having the committee chairs come to the budget review board is not going to be occurring this year.
And why is that?
Because we felt that the way we've laid out the timing, we felt that the chairs now have an opportunity to have input and discussion about the budget before the budget is finalized and tabled, and that the chairs with the portfolio that they have responsibility for have the opportunity to discuss with the city manager and the general managers and any of their key staff the issues related to their budget. And the role of in terms of the terms of reference for the budget review board is to look at the entire picture across the the whole city and not at specific committees and specific departmental mandates.
Okay. On the report received? Oh, sorry, Councillor Moffat, my apologies.
Just want to clarify something that was just mentioned. We've been doing this process, this will be the third year we've done this, in which we consult before we table the budget. That's a direct result of the Treasurer's Office working with Council on fixing the previous system where we consulted after we tabled the budget that councillors apparently didn't like. So they went around all the members of Council and asked them what you'd rather do, so we chose consulting before we tabled the budget. So if you want to change that, then change that. We did it to ourselves. Both didn't really work. So it is what it is, but I'm just saying, if you're going to criticize the current process, we're the ones that put it in place.
Well, he
in general,
did reference you.
I mean, essentially, there was a comment that Councillor Deans did make about the current process, so that's why.
And I believe we voted for that unanimously.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Deans.
I was only commenting on what the mayor said, that people come out when they see something they don't like, and I said, well, we kind of took that away from them, because that was the point.
But unless people want to change the system will remain the same. So item 11, Councillor Leeper, I believe.
Thanks, Mayor.
You want to be a part of FEDCO, I think.
For this item, just a brief question to staff. I am very much in favor of seeing external consultants turned into internal staff for creating the full-time equivalent to those. The report makes a lot of capacity building, training opportunities to develop our in-house IT capacity. It doesn't have a lot of specifics other than hiring the staff, though, about how that capacity will actually be built. We know we're moving into an environment where the IT skills that the organization needs are going to be different from the IT skills that were previously important to us. The opportunity of creating 12 new FTEs is one to help develop that capacity. But what is the training plan? How is that capacity actually going to be built?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I'm Jason Barney. I'm the manager of applications branch within ITS. So as part of all our professional services engagements, typically what we do is we build in that knowledge transfer component. So what we'll do there's several ways we'll do. We'll have, as their contracts are ramping down, we'll typically do formal knowledge transfer sessions where we will have those contractors bring our staff in to do sort of a more formal training. We'll also bring staff in to work on projects. So as we're transitioning into an operational mode, we'll bring our staff in to work with with contractors to do that knowledge transfer to them. And then they turn into more of an advisory role and less as a doer. So we do try and build that component into each one of our professional services engagements so we get that knowledge transfer. Once we get that capacity internally, what we'll do is we'll have our staff, a senior developer mentoring with intermediate developers to bring up their capacity so that we develop that across that competency across our different technology areas. So that's really how we do that.
So it's a fast-moving field, and one of the advantages of hiring consultants and contractors is that you are always hiring the most recent skill set. How do we intend that our staff are going to be at the cutting edge of where the skill sets are with respect to ongoing and continuing professional development?
So we have a number of different training opportunities that we've got. One of the things we're doing right now is called Pluralsight. So this is available to all our staff to go in to look at technology that they may not even be using at this moment, but we know it's coming. It's something we want to build some capacity on, or it's something we're looking to explore. So we have that opportunity available to our staff to build up their bench strength and their technology skills in those areas. Again, where we're looking at strategic initiatives, we'll look, we do have consultants who have more experience than we do in areas that we've not had that role yet. So again, getting the knowledge transfer from those staff to our internal staff to build up our competencies.
And maybe for the treasurer, I just want to make sure that we have, with the creation of 12 new FTEs, if we do want to make sure that those folks have those professional development opportunities, are you comfortable that we have the wiggle room in the budget moving forward to ensure that we're properly funding those training opportunities?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Chernyshenko on the IT issue? No. Okay. Okay, so on that report, carried. Notices of motion, avis de motion. No. Do we have any written inquiries? Other business? Adjournment? Carried. And our next meeting is the 4th of July, 2017.